The Baldwin County Public School System, considered one of the finest educational environments in the entire state of Alabama, has a history beginning in the latter part of the 18th century, when, as records indicate, Alabama's first public schoolhouse was built in the North Baldwin County community of Tensaw in 1799. At that time, nearly 10 years prior to Baldwin being organized as a county, the area remained geographically expanse. Agriculture served as king, and family farms dotted every section of the county. However, in this era of extremely limited highway systems, individual communities built their own respective public schoolhouses, with the Board of Education supplying teachers to provide instruction. In the early part of the 20th century, the Baldwin County Public School System boasted over 80 separate school districts, each with their own individual public schoolhouse. As time progressed, marked with improvements in transportation and engineering, numerous school districts were consolidated into nearby areas, leaving us today with very few of the original public schoolhouses which distinguished, beginning in 1799, Baldwin County as the birthplace of Alabama's first public schoolhouse. This documentary, commissioned by the Honorable County Commissioners of Baldwin County and honorable members of the Baldwin County Board of Education, seeks to illuminate these few remaining and historic original public schoolhouses in an effort to pay tribute to one of the finest public school systems in Alabama. Located in the central Baldwin unincorporated community of Elsanor, the Elsanor Consolidated School has roots dating to the early 20th century, when around 1913, an original wood-framed heart pine structure was constructed at a location several miles north of the present school site. It was at this time that Dr. Norton, a Chicago dentist, offered the original property and a monetary gift if the school would carry his wife's name, Elsa. Thus, the name of the school was derived from his wife's first name, Elsa, as well as the last three letters of their family name, Nor, making Elsanor.
Well, you know, Elsanor School goes back a long way, many, many years ago. Even before the first little school was built in 1913, there were four small schools. There was the Seminole School and the Bartland School, and there was one that was called Sumatra, and then Elsanor was a small little school. And so Mr. S.M. Tharp was the superintendent then, and they saw the need to build a larger school and just consolidate all of these small schools into one big school. And so they started looking for land, and so there was a company named Spalding and Peck, and they donated 10 acres, the 10 acres that this school is on today, sits on today. And then in 1925, they finished a nice brick school. It had a basement, and later they built a large auditorium on it, to the school. So Mr. George Strong was the first principal, and they had moved the first little Elsanor School. It was in 1913. It was about 4 or 5 miles from here on Red Cut Farm, where the Mosleys lived later on. It was located there, but I wanted to move it here to have a teacherage for the principals to live in. And so they took mules and logs and whatever. The men of the community moved the school, the teacherage, to behind this school. And so Mr. and Miss Strong were the first ones to live in the teacherage. They didn't have any children, but they did adopt a son when they were here who later became a doctor. But from then on, there were several principals who lived there. But then after there was no longer a need. The principals bought their own homes, and so it was converted into a library. It was renovated. The first little school was renovated into a library. And then the mothers took turns volunteering to put the books, card the books, and serve their time so they could check out the books. And then later on, they had, but in 1985, the school was going really good. We had several principals, and we'd got up to 175 students, I believe. And in 1985, November the 6th of that year, the school burned. There was 2 boys who were former students, and they set fire to the school. That night, they went into the office where I worked and took the records out of the filing cabinet, threw them on the floor, set fire to them, and they left, but they took a few things with them when they left, immaterial things. But so I got a call about 3 o'clock, and I came up here and I stood next to Mr. Wesley Grant, who was in charge of building the new schools then, and we were just all crying because of the loss of the school. Everything revolved around the school, the PTA meetings and the Halloween carnivals and the fish fries, and so much activity here in the community was at the school. And so it was just, we were devastated. And we didn't think they would build it back. But by then, Governor Wallace was going out of office, and we had a friend who was, Elvin Stanton was his, let's see, I think he was his public relations man or something like that. He always spoke for the governor. And he was from the community not far from here, and we knew him. And so we wrote letters, and my husband even went up there and talked to Mr. Stanton. And so out of his discretionary fund, he gave us $250,000, which was sent to the Board of Education. But they said they couldn't build a gym for that. And so he had to go back later and ask for another $100,000. And so then they decided they would build us a gym, but no air conditioning. But we were just happy to have a gym because we were in portables. When the school burned, they moved in portables. We had nothing here except the cafeteria and the first grade room. And the little school, the first little school, served as, I think there was about 4 different teachers teaching in that, speech teacher, the learning disability teacher. We even had the office over there, and the principal didn't even have a desk. I just had a small desk and 2 filing cabinets, and it would rain and it would be so muddy, and we had to put down planks to get to the cafeteria. But we endured until 1987. They started building right away, but it took them until 1987 of August, when school started. We moved into this wonderful new building, and we had a dedication, and Mr. Newton, who was the superintendent then, Larry Newton, and all of the school board came down. In fact, we had it in the library, and so many parents came, and we had refreshments, and we were just celebrating because we had a school again. And so there's a lot of history in this school. I can't remember all of it right now. We've had so many different principals that we have really loved and who have worked hard for the betterment of the school. We've had a lot of parents who have we had one lunchroom. We didn't even have a lunchroom program when my son started here, a hot lunch program. And so the ladies in the community went out and they took up donations to get the pots and the pans for the kitchen. And there was a little room where they put a stove in. And Miss Eva DeShina was our first lunchroom manager. And she drove the school bus too. And Maisie Nass was her helper. And so she didn't have a lot of commodities back then. She got some commodities like peanut butter, but she could make the best rolls. She'd get flour. But the farmers would stop by and they would bring her turnip greens and peas, and the students, when they had a break, they'd go in, help shell peas or whatever Miss Eva needed them to do. Sometimes the children would go out and pick blackberries, and she would make them blackberry pies. And my husband gave them sweet potatoes once, and She cooked them every day, every way that she knew how. And my son came home and said, "Daddy, please don't give Miss Eva any more sweet potatoes. We're so tired of them." But she made do. And so it was hard back in those days. We had to pay our own electric bill, the telephone bill. The PTA did. We had to raise funds. So we had big fish fries, big political rallies. And we even had a womanless wedding once, I think, and things like that to raise money to pay for the bills. The Board of Education didn't have the money back then to pay for everything, even supplies. We didn't get many supplies.
Housing for teachers in small communities was always a problem. The teacher was expected to board with members of the community, but sometimes there was just no place for them, and the county decided that it would be economical to build homes at certain schools to attract teachers of quality. The principal of a school got $10 a month for being principal, and then he got $5 a month for every extra teacher that he had, and that was in addition to his regular salary as a teacher, because the principal was in the small school was always a teacher himself or herself. So that free housing in the community was a very large attraction for teachers and with small families. I can remember a number of communities that built these. On the Foley High School campus, we had two of these. One was an original structure, and they later built a better one. And the first structure became the attraction for an agriculture teacher. It was felt that an agriculture teacher in Foley, it was just greatly important that they be able to attract such a teacher, and they couldn't do it without giving him a place to live. Now that was the only school and only one of the 4 high schools that actually provided for the ag teacher, but Foley had two such residences. In later years, they were when principals no longer wanted to live in the quality of building that were there. At Baldwin County High School, it became the means of attracting a janitor of good quality, which we paid such people such a very low salary that if there were an old building on the premises that he could live in, and I can remember at Baldwin County High School the janitor living in. Same thing at Stapleton School. In my time, the teacherage was occupied by the janitor.
My dad was a principal, and we moved from Bell Fountain northeast to here to Elsanor in the fall of 1934, and lived 3 years here in the parsonage. Our family did. It consisted of 3 brothers and 1 sister. And then well, my dad bought a farm northeast of here, about 3/4 of a mile. And we moved out of the parsonage, and then they rented it. The county did. And then the unusual thing was that we had my mother had put a piece of paper in to get the fire started in the fireplace, and it flew up on the shingle roof. And we always kept a ladder and a bucket of water handy, so my brother ran out and climbed the ladder and put it out with the bucket of water. That was the most unusual thing that happened while we lived here that I can remember. And also, when we moved here, we added on the 2 back rooms of the parsonage where we'd have room for the family. And then the one room there was used for selling candy for the school, for the playground equipment and other things that the school needed.
The original school was 2 miles away. I'm not sure I know exactly where the site is, but one of the buildings from that site was moved to the present Elsanor School site, and that was the teacherage. The teacherage was moved there and used as a teacherage. It had been previously used for that, and then it came to be used for every sort of thing, including kindergarten room and library. At one time, it's been all of those. Rosendon School in Elsanor was the first place that I know of where a principal was assigned to campuses that far, several miles apart. And he would spend the morning at one school and the afternoon at another, and then vice versa. Drainage was a big problem at Elsanor. One of the original buildings, back to that siting problem with the standard schools, one of the classrooms was partially underground, and it tended to flood. But in my time, we were able to do some things that drained it and made that classroom usable again. We had to abandon that classroom at one time because water leaked in it. I remember that on one occasion, an automobile went out of control and came over into the school grounds and ran over the natural gas pipe and broke it right in front of the school, and the gas went toward the school. And the principal and all his pupils fled down a dirt road behind the school. It was a potentially serious matter. But the Robertsdale Gas Department got out there quickly and capped it. But it was a frightening thing. Could have been serious. It was the standard school, except that one of the classrooms, due to the lay of the land, had to be underground. And that was partially underground. Then the windows were level with the ground, with a pit out in front of them for drainage. The hydrostatic pressure forced water into that building was one of our problems.
Like I say, it was way before my time of starting school, but the old school was, like Jeanette said, was over at Red Cut. And my mother went to school at Red Cut. But when they moved the Red Cut school over here, and then they built the old school that burned, well, the children didn't have any way to get to school. So my dad was a farmer, but he saw a need for a school bus. So you had to own your own school buses then. You bought your own buses. And he had an old T-model truck. And he had an old body built, old wood body, and put on the truck. And that was his bus, and it had just board seats and didn't have no window. It just had an old canvas that you could pull up, you know, whenever you wanted some air in there. And in the summertime, it stayed up. In the wintertime, of course, it was down. But then later on, that school bus was too small. The children, you know, it's too more school, but more children, you know, to go to school. And there was a need for a bigger bus. But anyway, there was a lot of kids that would live so far away from the bus stop till it was hard for them to get to bus. So my daddy was a believer of education. So those children that couldn't come, you know, had too far to come to meet the bus, they stayed with us during school time. And my mother, you know, sent them to school. But as the children, more children, you know, there's a need for a bigger bus, well, he would change bodies. Well, it wasn't long before that old T-model had to be converted into something else, so we had to buy another kind of bus. But anyway, I have some memories of Daddy he never missed a day of school. it didn't matter what went on, he drove that school bus. And back then we had Cowpen Creek, we had a bridge over it, and they'd be flash floods. Well, the water would get up over the bridge. Well, my dad, he'd go down to the creek. He would get out and he'd take a stick and he'd go pull his breeches legs up. Well, he really took his pants off and pulled up his long handles. But anyway, but he would take a stick and go across that bridge to see if the bridge was all there. If it was, well, he put his leather jacket, that was in the wintertime, over the radiator to keep him from drowning out, and go across that bridge with that bus. If he knew that there was going to be a flood or rain, he would leave the bus on the other side of the bridge, on the south side. Then we'd have to walk from where about 2 miles down to the creek. Then he would go across and see if the bridge was still there, and then all us kids, we'd hold hands and he'd lead us across. That was some good old times. It was cold times too, because we didn't have no heater in the bus. But anyway, later on, we got a bus that had windows, and we were so happy. And he would drive the bus, take the kids. He'd had to go all the way to Seminole Post Office, and then he'd drop the kids off here and then go on to Robertsdale. But in the earlier days, he would drop the kids off. There wasn't too many kids going to school then, and he'd drop them off at Miss Bosack's, and she would give them hot chocolate or whatever till he went to Seminole, and then he'd come back by and he'd pick them up. But he would let the elementary school children off here, and then he'd go on to Robertsdale and take the kids. Then he'd go back home, and he'd do his farm work till it was time to go back and pick up the children. So he was a very busy person, but like I say, he never missed a day of school. But he was also trustee as long as he drove the bus for 19 and a half years. And he was trustee of the school, you know, one of the trustees all the time. During the war in 1941, he'd never had an accident, so he was afraid that my brother was in the war, so he was afraid that he might get sidetracked thinking about my brother, so he decided to give it up. He just liked 6 months of driving it 20 years. But he always supported the school. But back then, in my teenage years, Jeanette, talking about the fundraisers, we had Negro ministers, however you say it, and we had box socials, and we had square dances, and you name it, we had it to raise money, because like Jeanette said, we had to pay the light bills, and you know, there's a lot of stuff that didn't get furnished, so we had to buy it ourselves. First, you got your box and you fixed it real pretty, because you wanted the boys, you know, to notice them. But also, you cook something and you put inside that box, and there'd be an auctioneer, and they'd auction off these boxes. And if you had a sweetheart, most likely that box would sell for quite a bit, because they didn't want you to eat for somebody else, so they upped the bid on the boxes. But we made a lot of money that way, and Mr. Mosley said he bought one of them boxes. I don't know who his sweetheart was then, but anyway, but it was a lot of fun, but it was a fundraiser. And it wasn't too long back, I had one of my boxes that I had was in the old trunk, and I threw it away. But silverfish had got into it, so I threw it away. But anyway, we had a hard time, but it was happy times. Back then, when my dad was driving a school bus, when he was getting $90 a month. He owned his own school bus. Now, I can't remember, before he quit driving, most likely the amount went up, but I can't remember that. I remember that he was making $90 a month when I was coming to school. But I attended school here. All my family, all my brothers and sisters did. Then my children, they all attended school here. My grandchildren all attended school here. And now my great-grandchildren are coming to school here. I got 2 great-grandchildren here now. And, but my mother was real active in PTA. And that was important back then. The PTA, we had good PTAs. It was people got together and fellowshipped, and that was important. But she made candy, she made cakes, cookies. Her and after Mr. Mosley began to be principal here, Miss Mosley and her, they manned the food when we had gatherings like Halloween carnivals, and they sold sandwiches, hamburgers, hot dogs, and all kind of stuff. And they made homemade ice cream. And my brother and Lawrence Mosley, they done the churning of the 10-gallon ice cream, and they was rewarded for it. They got 1 cone of ice cream for churning that 10-gallon of ice cream. But back then, you know, that was about a nickel's worth, but I remember Mr. Mosley run a candy store, and once in a while I could get a nickel, and I'd buy me a nickel's worth of silver bells, and it'd be a big sack full of silver bells. It'd be, man, it'd last you a week just about, just for a nickel. But I'm proud of this school, and it just means so much to me. And I was born and raised in Elsanor community, and we lived over on the river, but it was Elsanor. And I've always been supportive of the school. My dad, my whole family has, so as long as I live, I'll continue to be as supportive as I possibly able to. I think we got some fine teachers, we got some fine students here.
This particular teacher, school bus driver, had run out of soap. He just, his patience was taxed to the very limits to do his job. Now, he'd been a school bus driver in a lot of years, and in those years, we had to cross a lot of railroad tracks. And the state taught you that the proper way to cross a railroad track is to find a responsible student to come to a stop a full 15 feet before you come to the railroad track, put out that student, have the student walk the track. That was called walking the track. And he was to look down the track both ways, and he was to signal the school bus driver that it was safe to come. And then he was to trot more than a school bus length down the road and wait for the bus to come. Then it was the school bus driver's duty to exercise independent judgment. He was supposed to do his looking to the right and to his left, then proceed across and pick up the child. Now, this did 2 things. It made the school bus driver stop, and it provided witnesses that he had actually stopped. And then it gave him an extra pair of eyes on that thing. Well, there was a young boy that lived north of Loxley who eventually came to be a member of this particular school bus driver, teacher, mechanics teacher's class, and his name was Richard. And Richard was an experienced track walker. But he was walking a track that was rarely traveled. And in the course of his vast experience, Richard had never actually seen a train. He had just automatically gone out there, he had looked, did his looking. And now, when we transferred over to this other, Richard being an experienced track walker and working for his regular morning school bus driver where he had been used to perform, again he had to perform this service on the way home. Well, on this particular afternoon, one hot September afternoon, about 3 weeks into the school year, when everybody's temper was, they had just reached the absolute limit because they didn't have any teaching materials. And when Richard got out at Robertsdale on his way back to Robertsdale School, when he got out and crossed the tracks for the first time in his life, a locomotive appeared on the scene, and Richard panicked. Instead of signaling to his school bus driver, he ran down the tracks toward the train, waving to stop the train. The conductor of the train looked down the tracks, and he sees a yellow school bus, and he doesn't know whether it's actually on the tracks or not, and he sees this student frantically waving down, so he panics too. And he put on his brakes, and he comes squealing up, and he comes to a stop. And with that, Richard calmly turns his back on the train and wriggling motions the school bus to cross in front of it. Well, the school bus driver had previously lost his cool, and he was shouting to "No, Richard, no, no, no!" And the kids took it up, "Go, Richard, go, go!" The locomotive engineer, he lost his cool too. And he fell out of his train, and he came up to the school bus, and he said things to the school bus driver that he didn't learn in Sunday school. The poor school bus driver, when he eventually got over to Robertsdale High School, went in to report the whole business to the school principal. And the school principal happened to have a tape recorder handy, and he taped the school bus driver's account of this affair. Later, almost a year later, I had told this story to the state transportation supervisor, and that fall at the meeting in Tuscaloosa, he asked me to tell this story. And I told my story to all of the state school bus supervisors. One of them took the story to the national meeting of transportation supervisors, the state supervisors in Washington, D.C. And later on, at a meeting in Denver, Colorado, of the National Association of School Business Administrators, I happened to be present. And we had a seminar on school transportation. And one of the Washington transportation man told this story at a meeting at which I was present. So the story went all over the United States.